So at this time, it's time to welcome you to our Q&A program. This is the second program of the day, and Derek and I are pleased that you chose to join us. We're here to give you straight answers so you'll have peace of mind so that you'll know how to get to a successful future at your association. But let me lay a little groundwork. First question is, why are we doing this? Why are we doing this webinar, and why are we talking about reserves? Well, it's because every year, every board member and every manager is asking the question, how much reserves should we responsibly set aside? And that's a big annual question. And there are some fundamental principles to this industry and the kind of work that we do. And one of them is what we call the 4 reserve rules. First is expenses always happen. Nothing we can do about that. Ignoring a roof doesn't make it not deteriorate. Number 2, the board is responsible. That's their job, to take care of the common areas, sustain the association. Number 3, delays usually get expensive. With scope creep, you can just see it so simply with once you let a roof fail, then all of a sudden, instead of just a roof replacement cost, you have water-related damage and lots of other things going on. And number 4, homeowners are the ones who always get stuck paying the bills. They are the ones who provide the income. So it's up to the board to know the expenses, do the right expenses, and not let them get out of hand. And all we're talking about today is based on National Reserve Study standards, which have been in place since 1998. So it's a very strong foundation of the principles and concepts that we'll be sharing today. And we're going to keep the numbers pretty simple. As you see on screen, there are 3 types of reserve studies. The full reserve study, which is create from scratch. Update with site visit is just as it is stated, and update no site visit. Again, self-describing. Those are the 3 kind of tools that we use in doing work for clients. Adjusting between the full, which is typically done once, and updating with site visit or with a no site visit in the subsequent years. And again, keeping the numbers simple, there are 3 parts to a reserve study. There's the component list, which we call the foundation of the reserve study. It defines which projects we need to fund through reserves. And there's a calculation of reserve fund strength, measuring if you have enough or not. And then based on that, what we have to recommend as a funding plan so you can get successfully to the future. Now, when I talked about the component list, you might ask yourself, what defines what we fund through reserves? And fortunately, there's a National Reserve Study Standard 4-part test. And I can share that with you on screen here. It needs to be a common area of responsibility, needs to have a limited useful life, a predictable remaining useful life so you can see it coming, and it needs to be above a minimum cost of significance. So you're not doing mops and buckets and individual light bulbs, the things of significance that you need to plan ahead to accomplish. And again, keeping the numbers simple, in 2020, CAI, the National Trade Organization, released a research paper that were best practices for how to get successfully to the future. So for every building that's getting a little bit older every day, how does that happen? How do you get successfully to the future? Well, it's a 4-part process. Number 1, update your reserve study regularly. Make sure you're working on fresh information, not old information. Fund reserves as recommended, so you have the money set aside. Then with those funds, spend the reserves as recommended. Make sure you're doing the projects, taking care of the projects. Your goal is not to accumulate cash. Your goal is to care for the property. So don't just sit on that reserve cash that you've collected, and supplement it. Number 4, perform periodic infrastructure inspections, looking into what does the property need on a physical, maybe under the surface level. We in the reserve study profession are budget and cash flow experts. We see a lot of normal cyclical projects, but there are some important things that an engineer or architect can see that are of value that will inform the kind of anticipated costs we cycle into the reserve study. And with that brief introduction, we'll now turn to the Q&A portion of the program. I think we're going to start, Derek, with the few questions that people submitted in advance. And I see people are already typing in some questions. That's great. The chat feature is for you to speak to each other. And the Q&A is how Derek will get news of all the questions that you'd like to have answered. So Derek, say hello, and that's all you.
Robert, hello. Hello to the audience. I'm really excited to be here. This is our our second session of the day. And we had just lots of great questions earlier today, and we're going to have more great questions on this session.
Now, you're setting us up. That means we need to have some great answers.
Yeah, I'm hoping we have the great answers.
There we go.
No, we're going to have great answers. Okay, so let's start off with the first question. How do we use the study when planning your budget?
Go.
Yeah, for me, that starts with you preparing the reserve study in preparation for the upcoming fiscal year. Reserve studies are always done in preparation of the upcoming year so that you guys can make your budget decisions and make sure that you're reserving an adequate amount moving forward. That's far and away the most important thing.
Yeah, you got a budget cycle. I said my first slide was why. And the why is every year, every board member, every manager needs to know what's the right thing to do. What's my first next step? And that recommended funding amount is that number that you want to be able to fit into your budget so you can be setting aside enough money so you'll be able to accomplish your roofing, painting, asphalt, all your other projects. The other factor is, remember, I showed the 3 parts of the reserve study. That second is the reserve fund status. It's a calculation of how strong your reserve fund is. It may look good that you have $50,000 in reserves, but your reserve study is going to tell you your percent funded, which measures a weak, fair, or strong. And that's good to know. It'll help you know, are we doing okay, or do we have a lot of catch up yet to do?
Yeah, great point, Robert. I mean, $50,000 might be a great amount of money for one association or one property, but
not one individual.
Or one individual, but not a great amount for maybe a big high rise that has lots of expensive mechanical systems.
Right.
So, yeah. So next question here I have, we have a line item. It's an allowance for concrete walkway repairs. The current cost estimate for this component is $4,000, has a useful life of 10 years, and a remaining useful life of 0. So no remaining useful life. We spent $3,000 in 2021, $4,000 in 2022. Should we have this line item updated, and should we reset the remaining useful life and increase the cost estimate to $7,000? So a lot going on there.
Yeah, a lot going on. Derek, how would you address this as a provider? Would you just say, hey, it seems like a lot's going on. Tell me what was happening. Are these repeatable? Isn't that part of kind of the interview that you do at the beginning of a reserve study project?
Yeah, my first response to this question, or this series of questions, is it depends, right? It's so dependable on the actual property, and it's what are the anticipated expenses moving forward for that concrete work? Did you have a lot of deferred maintenance on the concrete, so it was required that you did twice the budgeted amount this cycle around, but you're not anticipating that moving forward? Or are you anticipating more concrete work moving forward as these trees get larger and the roots start elevating the concrete walkways? And if that's the case, then maybe the fit for your property is to increase your component estimate to roughly $7,000. So again, it just depends on the property itself.
I think a key word you used there was fit. We want to model the expenses at the association so it fits the needs of the association, so it's a nice match. It's not or necessarily one size fits all or just a quick calculation. We need to understand what's going on.
Yeah. Okay, Robert, next question here. Will the GSEs be scrutinizing reserves now and in the future after the Florida building collapse, especially since there's been a few other properties in Florida that have been put on notice?
Simple answer is yes. Now, GSE is a government-sponsored enterprise. It's things like Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and they are backing mortgages. So when a property goes away, like Champlain Tower South went away, they lose a lot of money. So they need to tighten their standards to close this loophole that they've had that allowed board members to, you could argue, operate recklessly, not care for the property. So yes, you can expect the GSEs, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, to be tightening their standards. They have made one wave. We all heard about that early here in 2022. And I had the fortunate opportunity to participate in a telecon where they were testing even further tightenings of their standards. So yes, you can expect to see further tightening of their lending standards, and that is no surprise. They're not in business to make money or to lose money. They want to protect their assets and make sure that when they guarantee or when they back mortgages, those buildings are going to be around for a long time.
Yeah, they want to minimize their risk for sure.
Absolutely.
Next question is very related. So is Fannie Mae Reserve contributions a mandatory requirement?
Well, there's two ways to answer that. One is the simple answer is yes. Fannie Mae says that's our standard. Now, if you or I are buying a condominium unit, we shop for a mortgage generally. And if that lender intends to sell that mortgage on the secondary market off to Fannie Mae, then yes, then that's going to be a requirement. You can find a lender that will be servicing that loan for 30 years, and they don't need to toe the line to the Fannie Mae standards. But let me make it clear that most associations need to contribute 15 to 40% of their budget towards reserves, and the Fannie Mae standard is only 10%. So there should be no problem meeting the Fannie Mae standard. There's almost no excuse to be down in that kind of range.
Yeah, you could put it the other way around. If you're below 10%, there is a problem.
Yeah, you're right. That's exactly who Fannie Mae wants to be screening out, and get the message.
Okay, I got a really great question regarding inflation. It's pretty common these days in my practice. So what inflation rate are you using in future years? And I assume that they're referring to the reserve study.
There's a two-part answer to that. So why don't you talk about the current cost and the future cost side of that?
So today in 2022, what we're seeing are the actuals, the cost estimates for projects that our clients are taking on. They're up big. They're up a lot. They're probably up more than inflation. Inflation's at 8% right now. So we're adjusting all those real world cost estimates as far as the components go by at least that number, at least 8%. And we're identifying, real actual cost estimates for some of these projects and making the adjustments to the study. But the second part Robert's referring to is the inflation assumption moving forward. And so since the reserve study looks over a 30-year window, we don't believe that inflation has staying power at 8%. So we're using something more nominal, like 3 to 5% in our reserve studies.
Yeah, we are looking forward decades, and we don't expect that this, what we hope is temporary high inflation, is going to last for an extended period of time. So if you are getting an update to your reserve study and it's been 3 years since it was last touched, you're going to find the pricing is way out of line. 3 years ago was before the pandemic, before supply chain problems. There's just before labor shortages. So yes, things are much higher now, and we are reflecting that in our current costs. But as far as projecting 10, 20, 30 years into the future, we are hoping and trusting that a good estimate is what, Derek, 3 or 4%?
Yeah, 3, 4, maybe even 5%. But yeah, it's very impactful on the future funding plan too. So it's just important that we kind of keep our eyes on the future moving forward.
Right. Good.
Okay. I got one more question from the list. These are all pre-submitted questions. And then Robert, in the other window over here, I see we got a lot of great questions coming in from the live audience. So I'm gonna switch to those questions shortly. So next question from the list: how do we decide between operating or reserves for vehicles or machinery? So the simple answer is if it's a vehicle or machinery that's leased, then right away I know and understand that as an operating expense. Generally speaking, if it's purchased, then it should be considered a reserve expense.
Very simply stated. Couldn't have said it any better.
Okay, so now to the questions. So here's the first one. Older complexes have unique issues with aging infrastructure. How should this be addressed in reserves as opposed to the operating budget for planning?
Let me start with that one. as I said at the very beginning, we are in the budget and cash flow business, and we help associations see and prepare for the future. We incorporate the opinions of outside experts, roofing experts, HVAC experts, boiler experts, structural experts in the reserve studies that we do. So we are expecting that you're going to have that kind of information, and we're going to look for that information as we try to help your association prepare effectively for the future.
Yeah, that's a great point, Robert. We definitely need those expert vendors involved, kind of looking under the hood. When I work with older properties, I'm in San Francisco, so some of these projects were built over 100 years ago. There's definitely, and sometimes literally, skeletons, on the wall.
Hopefully not too many times.
Yeah, I just hear the stories. I don't get to see the evidence. But it takes a team, to make it work. And when you have those other experts involved that can provide additional information that we can kind of bake into the reserve study, it becomes that more useful of a tool.
Yeah. I said it earlier, the 4 steps, the best practices for getting a building successfully to the future as it gets older and older and older. Update your reserve study, fund the reserves, spend the reserves, and supplement it with an infrastructure report.
Yeah. Here's a great question from James. Is there a standard format for reserve studies, or does each company develop it and use its own?
That's a good question. I guess the answer is kind of maybe.
Yeah.
There are National Reserve Study standards, as we said, that require a certain amount of information be presented in a reserve study, but each provider is going to lay that out differently through their pages, through their tables. I think some of them do a better job than others. There's some that inspire us so that we think about, we'd like to do that in our next revision of our software. And there's some that don't read so clearly. Derek, some of your observations?
Yeah, I would say that some companies kind of use kind of an open source software that others use as well. So they pay to use software while others develop it internally. But if you look close enough, the same material is going to be in the reserve study. It's just going to be displayed in a different format. Right.
It's all built on the foundation of the component list. And then you do the calculations for how strong the reserve fund is. Then you recommend a funding plan. So every reserve study is going to have those same basic elements.
Okay. We got a question from Kay. If boundary walls are not included in the reserve study due to not knowing the useful life, how do we pay for future replacement? I assume she's talking like boundary walls, like exterior walls to building a property.
Yeah.
And not necessarily perimeter boundary walls.
Okay. I was visualizing a large plan development with a perimeter concrete block wall along a hillside, and it's been there for a long time. You expect it to be there for a long time. Remember the four-part test for determining a reserve component? It needs to be common area, needs to be life limited, predictable remaining life, and above a minimum cost. And Derek, maybe it was similar to that question earlier, that sometimes when you don't know, maybe you provide an allowance for periodic repairs.
Yeah, that's exactly what I would do. Whether it's the perimeter around the property, a block wall that probably would never need to be completely replaced, or if it's exterior siding to a property, an allowance is a good way to start. And as we begin to understand the scope and the needs of what it is we need to do with these items, then we can start to add, additional funding to the study.
Right. As we get to know the property better, we understand the fit. But yeah, I would say that we can't walk up to a property and say, oh, that perimeter block wall way out there, yeah, that'll fail in 17 years for $1.5 million.
Or 78 years,
Yeah.
We're not fortune tellers. We're just relying on, National Reserve Study standards and what we see at other properties.
Yeah. And we can ask them, well, how much have you been spending? And they said, well, we fixed one section 5 years ago, and we fixed another section 12 or 13 or 14 years ago. And that's what we begin to talk about, like an allowance. like giving them an ability to fix it rather than replace the whole thing.
Okay. So Scott's got a question for us. There's been a long debate at our HOA about only including real property component items versus personal property. Items like vehicles and other items are funded out of operating. I mean, we mentioned it earlier. I believe that you can include things like vehicles and utility trucks, and I got these sprawling single family home communities and rural areas that need tractors to put the association back together after a big snowstorm, that kind of thing. So I fully believe that you can include those as items.
Yeah, it's what we're talking about here is the intersection between accounting standards and reserve safe standards, and there is a little bit of overlap and conflict, a little bit. But we're in the reserve safe side of things. We want to help our clients prepare. And if they've got a $20,000 pickup that the security detail drives around all night around the property, by golly, every 5, 6, 7, 8 years, I want them to have $20,000 plus inflation to get that thing replaced. Even if in accounting standards it says this shall not be funded in advance. Again, we're dealing with reserves here. We're the budget and cash flow business, and we want to help our clients succeed. And National Reserve Safe standards allow us to do that.
Yeah, we're forward looking to make sure that they have the budget means to take care of this item, whereas bookkeeping and accounting are historical, and they're looking at it from a little bit different of a angle or a lens.
Good point.
Okay, scrolling down the list.
Are you cherry picking the easy ones or the hard ones?
No, I'm just making the easy ones.
Yeah. We want to look good for our live audience.
Okay. So Sue has a question here. The community is exploring xeriscaping. Well, it's some kind of a landscaping here. The rough plan
xeriscaping.
Xeriscaping without a Z, with an X.
Yeah, with that's low water requirements.
Okay. The rough plan is to around $100,000. Nothing like this is in the reserve study. Please comment on the process and how to handle this moving forward versus capital plan versus reserving.
Yeah. I think you touched on this in the first program, Derek. Landscaping is a significant cost, and it's common area. It's reasonable to expect to need to upgrade it every 15, 20, 25 years. You can see that coming. And there's so many of our clients, and you would know, especially in California, that are having severe watering problems with a drought situation. And so it is very reasonable to have a landscaping upgrade and to dial that into your reserve plans. So every 20 years or so, you can get this done and maintain the property. Is that somewhere along your lines?
Yeah. And I would add, just like, the reserve studies, kind of this living, breathing document that needs to get updated in time. And maybe there was only a need for $10,000 in landscaping every 5 years, 25 years ago. And now that we're updating the reserve study, $100,000 every 5 or 10 years is a good fit for your community. So without knowing this community, Sue's community, I would say that, you could at least explore just updating your reserve study to make sure that you have $100,000 for when you need to take care of it.
Yeah. Speak about that with your reserve study provider.
Absolutely. Okay. And here's another question. A reserve study as of 12/31/2021 recommended 2% increase in 2023. However, that was based on a 3% inflation. And as we all know, inflation rate is now significantly higher. Yes, it is. Assuming all other assumptions and estimates in the reserve report remain the same, what range of increase in 2023 would you recommend?
Well, Derek, in California, isn't the requirement for a with-site visit update every third year and to update and make accurate the reserve study in those in-between years? So they're dealing with a little bit of dated information. They've got some catching up to do. If they don't want to update their reserve study, they're going to have to guess, and they should guess higher than that plan, because that plan is based on old information.
Yeah. Whatever they think that they should guess at, they should guess even a little higher. There's been a lot of changes in cost estimates for these projects that we cover in the reserve study, and they're up at a much higher rate than the 8% inflation number that we keep hearing about in the news.
Yeah. Hey, maybe this is time to put in a plug for our uPlanIt reserve study calculator. It's an online reserve study, literally an online reserve calculator. It allows you, the client, to interact with your reserve numbers, and you can look at your information from December 2021 and type in some changes. What's happening if everything is getting a little more expensive? What should our funding requirement be? And you can play with those numbers and see for yourself. And that's just $149 on a subscription level. It's free for associations, our clients, during their budget season. But in subsequent years, just $149 if you want to start working with your numbers.
Yeah, it's probably a lot closer of an estimate than just their guess,
Correct.
Than just saying everything's up 8%. I'm going to just make our reserve contributions 8% more. I think if you plug in some numbers pretty quick into the calculator, then you'll be able to see what the numbers should actually be.
Good point.
Yeah, Rick said, "Hi guys." And then he said, "Hi guys, I submitted a question involving how to access and use your uPlanIt software. Will you have time to respond to this question today?"
Derek, let me do that with a maybe. I've got it queued up in the background. I want to remind everyone, we did a uPlanIt demonstration webinar. We will spend the entire session going through it, but let me pull that up. What you're seeing, I should share my screen again. Okay, what you're seeing is what it looks like when you log into our client center. This is what it would look like if you're a portfolio manager. You'd see a list of your properties here, and you click on the property. You go to uPlanIt. Well, first off, you can see your completed reserve study here and download the PDF, or you can literally go in here to uPlanIt and work with your numbers. This is your component list. If you think that the wood fence needs to be done this year, you can edit it and change that remaining useful life of 2 to 0. Save it. You can do all those kind of updating things. You can check with the control panel, and instead of $292,000, if you had a emergency $50,000 expense, you can change this down to $242,000 and save that. And if you want to be 100% funded, you're going to have to set aside a little bit more than $48.50 per month. Let's see what the wizard says. $49.80 per month. And got manual overrides here, and then just tables and charts if you want to see things like your 30-year summary. It's actually pretty simple. It's literally that. It's an online calculator. We have an entire webinar on YouTube and on our website that you can look into, but that's pretty much it. You log on to our client center to see your completed reserve study, and you just click on the uPlanIt tab, and there you're at.
Yeah, it's really intuitive, Robert. I keep getting just like lots of clients telling me about how easy it is to use and how much they appreciate having access to that. And I'll add that it's an independent data set. So it's not the same information that we're using to put together your reserve study reports. So you can't break anything. You can continue to just like change it to your heart's content. But we maintain offline that separate data set. And you can always reset and revert back to what our original recommendations were.
Yeah, let me just demonstrate that. Let's take this wood shingle siding, and let's change the repaint number. Let's say, Derek, you were just having or the board member thinks you were having a bad day. It's not going to cost $46,000. It's going to cost $4,600. Okay? And save that. And go and see if and how much that changes things. And obviously it changes things a lot, but you could always go back here and say reset. and you're back to normal. And again, as you said, this is your kind of sandbox where you can play with your numbers. We have the master data on our computer, and you can play with numbers to your heart's content. It's your area. You're not breaking anything on our side.
Okay, more questions. Peggy asked a question here. Are dock state projects costing 20% or less of the annual general budget have to be okayed by 51% of the section? Can additional parking spaces be built as per an engineer report using the reserve funds for the townhome section? Yeah, it's kind of two questions there.
Can we bounce that to their attorney?
Yeah, right. we don't have a copy of their governing doc, so we don't quite know what it says, but
yeah. Well, we talked earlier about some of these questions you really need to talk to your reserve study professional about. Sometimes it's appropriate to speak to your manager, and sometimes it's appropriate to speak to your attorney. You'll give us some insights. Take advantage of the professionals that surround you. As a board member, your life is hard enough. You don't need to be extending yourself and getting out on the thin ice. So ask an expert for specific help on this one. We're here to give general advice on this free webinar, but that may be something where you need to get a little bit of your attorney's time.
Yeah. Regarding the additional parking spaces, Robert, let's just assume for argument's sake here, she's mentioning and talking out building in some new asphalt work. I would view that as a capital expense, and capital expenses need to be handled either as a special assessment or through excess operating funds, and not necessarily funds that come out of reserves. So,
can I challenge you on that?
Sure.
Okay. What if it's a 10-car parking lot and they want to make it a 50-car parking lot? Capital improvement?
I would assume so, but maybe to talk to their attorney.
No, I would say capital improvement. What if it's a 10-car parking lot and they want to make it a 11-car parking lot with that 11th spot being a handicap spot? And what if they do it when they plan to resurface it anyway?
Yeah, it's maybe a gray area.
Yeah, that's all. I just want to make the point that it is the kind of thing where you need to speak to your reserve study professional and explain the situation, because it's not necessarily a one-size-fits-all. If you're dialing in a reserve study project, nowhere in reserve study standards are we mandated to replace like for like. If you've got a 20-year-old elevator, there's no way you want to buy technology from 20 years ago. You want current technology. And so as you're thinking about what's appropriate for the association, those normal nominal upgrades are things that are pretty commonly absorbed into the reserve budget.
Yeah. Related question here from Mary is, are e-car charging stations an association or a homeowner's cost? So
a good question. A very good question.
Yeah.
When you initially install them, that's a capital improvement. If you put them in the common area, that's a common area capital improvement. So that's special assessment time. Yeah. If it is in unit number 15's dedicated parking spot, that's a homeowner expense. Fair? Yeah. And if it's in dedicated parking spot unit 15, it's theirs to maintain forever and ever. And some future owner may upgrade it. They may take it out. That's up to them. But once it is installed, if you install it in the common areas, and we had a client do this, they put in 4 nice ones in guest parking close to the office. They did it as a capital improvement. And then after they did it as a capital improvement with special assessment money, then we dialed it into the reserve study, because then it becomes an existing asset. And so we funded for replacing it. I don't remember right now, 10 or 15 years from now.
Yeah. Robert, I feel like we could do a whole webinar on these e-chargers. I'm in San Francisco. Maybe 1 out of 5 people have a Tesla these days. Yep. And it's becoming a hot topic. The electrical infrastructure that goes into some of these buildings that are 60, 80, or 100 years old are aren't strong enough or sophisticated enough to handle some of these charging systems. So there's that whole aspect. Who pays for that?
It's not just simple like you can buy one for 10 grand and install it for 5 grand and you're done.
Yeah.
Because if there's not enough backbone in the association's electricity supply to make that happen, that's a value of the property type of thing where it's just, you may need to consider moving.
Yeah. Mary had just the best question, and I feel like we didn't get her a strong answer, but I guess the best answer to the question is it really just depends. And we would need to explore it a little bit more, and we would need a team around us, maybe the attorney or the association.
Well, an attorney and then the electrician. The electrician could say, is it even possible or not? If it's possible, then we can go down that path. If the electrician says there's no way in a building of this age without an incredibly expensive upgrade to the entire electrical backbone of this property, you learn something there. But that's the team aspect. And again, going to your experts for advice.
Yeah. Kay got back to us. She said she was talking about the perimeter walls around the planned development. So just like block walls all the way around it. Again, it just depends, and it's specific to your site and how they're aging and handling, and what kind of materials they're made from, obviously, too.
Right. Yeah, we want to model it accurately. And if we have zero expectation that we're going to replace it all at once, then there's no way that we should be remodeling it as a 100% replacement at a particular point in time.
Rolf has a great question here. He's in a state that requires reserve studies every 5 years, full reserve studies. That's been their practice. But what's the rationale behind doing updated reserve studies more often than 5 years?
The rationale boils down to just thinking about if you were to go to a bank and ask for a loan, they'd ask for your last 3 years of tax returns. They want current information. They want to see your pay stubs, things like that. What we find is that as we track our clients, we look at them, the clients that hire us every 5th year, the clients that hire us every 3rd year, and Derek, a lot of your clients hire us every year. And the special assessments go down and down and down and down the more frequently you update your reserve study, just because you're dealing with more current information, you're adjusting. And so the benefit is you significantly minimize your special assessment exposure by updating your reserve study more frequently than every 5th year. CAI even came out last October in their condo safety report following the Champlain Tower South collapse in recommending every 3rd year having a with site visit update. It's a good sweet spot between doing it every year and doing it every 5th or 10th year, which is way too long in between.
Yeah. And Ralph, I'll just add, if you got a reserve study completed, roughly 5 years ago and you're ready to update it now, things are going to be so much different. It was a different world 5 years ago. It's pre-pandemic, pre-labor shortage, pre-supply chain issues. So you've probably been off track for quite a while.
Yeah. Internally at Association Reserves, we call reserve studies that are 5 years old a rescue. The reserve studies that are 3 years old, we call an adjustment. And the reserve studies from the prior year, we call those a tweak. And that's, you can just hear from our terminology how far they get out of line.
Yeah. James had a question right below Ralph's, and it said, should a reserve study be updated every year? And I'm in California, and there's disclosure rules and laws which essentially require reserve studies each and every year. But we did an internal survey a few years ago. We found that associations that come back to us yearly and get their reserve studies updated typically are 13% higher funded than those clients that come back to us every 3 or 5 years.
Yeah. And that reflects in your home values, which is not $10 or $15 a month. Your home values is thousands of dollars. It's lower risk of special assessments. And Derek, the cost of that kind of compliance is really pretty minimal because I showed at the very beginning, the most expensive reserve study is a full reserve study where we create from scratch. Less expensive is an update with site visit because we're not spending as much time on site. And even less expensive is a no site visit update. So those no site visit updates in between years, between that every 3rd year reserve study, It's very inexpensive. It's a high value thing to get done for your association.
Yeah, Robert, you're exactly right. I mean, we charge $500, maybe $1,000 for more complicated no site visit study. I feel like it's fairly reasonable price.
For a large association, that's trivia to help keep their budget on track. Last question.
Yeah, last question. Let me see here. Scott asked, we already reserve project management fees for reserve projects. What about preliminary project development fees, design plan? So he's just talking about the soft costs. Can we include those in the cost estimates? And the answer is yes, absolutely. It's actually really important that you include those costs. They can drive up a project an additional 10 or 20%.
Yeah, soup to nuts, just the whole thing. Plans, permits, shipping, installation, demolition, and disposal. All those kinds of things are part of the project. The money's got to come from somewhere. So we're talking about entire project, consultant fees, the whole thing. Ready for me to wrap it up?
Please, Robert, do so.
Let's do it. Okay, back to the PowerPoint, and let me just share a few things in closing. There we go. Okay, we showed you a little bit with uPlanIt. We want to leave you with the thought that that online tool exists. It's there to help you with your budget process. Again, that very first question that you answered, Derek, what you do with a reserve study is dial it into your budget, into your monthly assessments. You can test all ideas. You can document your plan so you're not having to guess, and it's free with all our professional reserve studies, and $149 on a subscription basis for other associations. And I spoke about the assets that we have, the educational assets we have on our website. You can also go to YouTube. We have even more on YouTube. So you can go there, search for something reserve study wise, find something from Association Reserves, and subscribe. And that'll put you in the pipeline for more of this type of information. We're here to guide you into the future. We've used that terminology before. We've been up and down this trail many, many times. We know the twists, the turns, the danger points along the trail. And our job is to get you successfully to the future. And so we're going to stand beside you. We use terminology like getting assistance, reaching out for expert help. And that's exactly what we want to do here. That's who we want to be. Some of the resources that we have, the recent webinars, you'll find, again, both on our website and YouTube. We have a full uPlanIt demonstration. We had one that was very enlightening just a month or two ago on investments and inflation with an expert from the investment community, developing the funding plan, showing you how we develop a funding plan. That might be insightful if you want to have some ideas for what you can do when you're playing with your uPlanIt tool. And then avoiding reserves quicksand. Using that guide illustration, we see our clients going on a path to the future, and we want to keep them out of danger, out of the quicksand that can suck you into problems. Upcoming webinars next Wednesday is Advanced Reserve Concepts for Managers and Boards. You can get notification for these upcoming projects if you're on our email list. Go to any page on our website and scroll down to the bottom and sign up. Otherwise, you can always go to our website and sign up. And then funding reserves, what happens when you don't? That's going to be a fun program. Again, our website is reservestudy.com. We've been doing this since 1986. We're here to help. We're here to guide. This is our contact information for Derek and myself. At this point in time, Derek, if I can speak for the both of us, we want to thank you for joining us today. Your time is precious. If you have any questions or if there's any way we can be of service to you, please don't hesitate to contact us.